The clearance threat of John Brennan. That's the focus of tonight's angle. The media have been in a fit of apoplexy after the White House press secretary Sarah Sanders announced yesterday that the president is considering revoking security clearances from certain Obama-era intel officials, along with one from the Bush administration.
It's political. I mean, it's entirely political.
It's punishing your critics.
They're just attempting to now, gaslight and distract from something else.
I think it's very, very dangerous undermining of the intelligence community and almost the creation of an enemies list.
This is not a small thing to have a president suggesting retribution for political criticism in this way.
It reminds me, David Ignatius, of what happened with Erdogan after he took control in Turkey. Who did he go after first? He went after the generals.
What a buffoon. I'm sorry, Erdogan. All right, Joe. Hey, here's how NBC Nightly News led their broadcast last night.
It's an unprecedented threat aimed at some critics of the commander-in-chief's. The White House now considering stripping the security clearances of 6 former intelligence officials.
Dun, dun, dun. It's an unprecedented threat. They make it sound like Trump is threatening to bomb former CIA Director John Brennan's house. Of course, it's hyperbolic reporting, and it comes from Brennan's current employer, NBC. But shouldn't it concern the media that former intel officials are using their credentials to lend themselves credibility as they go off to engage in political combat with the President of the United States? The truth is, former intel officials have retained their security clearances for decades, not as a booby prize for service, but to benefit the government, maybe consulting work and so forth. For instance, the CIA is working on a case involving something a former intel official had worked on. He can use his continued access to act as a reference, maybe give some insights. But has it all gotten out of hand? Roughly 4.2 million Americans had security access or were eligible for access since 2015, according to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. The General Accountability Office calls this a high risk for national interests. It's perfectly legitimate, though, for the president to recall the clearances of retirees in the interest of national security, isn't it? So if the government needs retired officials to help on cases, well, the government can insist that they go through the normal clearance process again. But when you're talking about individuals like Brennan, it's a wonder how he maintained a clearance at all. Let's look at the Brennan record for just a moment. Before he became their favorite Trump basher, the Democrats in the Senate despised him. Some urged his resignation as CIA director for lying about spying, and not spying on the bad guys, but on the Senate. He's been caught lying multiple times during his government career. Senator Dianne Feinstein in March 2014 called out the CIA under Brennan's leadership for its effort to harass and thwart an ongoing Senate investigation into the Bush-era enhanced interrogation program.
Based on what Director Brennan has informed us, I have grave concerns that the CIA's search may well have violated the separation of powers principles embodied in the United States Constitution. It may have undermined the constitutional framework essential to effective congressional oversight of intelligence activities or any other government function.
Now, of course, Brennan was incredulous that anyone would question his credibility and his integrity.
As far as the allegations of, CIA hacking into, Senate computers, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, we wouldn't do that. I mean, that's just beyond the scope of reason in terms of what we would do.
Well, naturally, they did spy, and they would spy. What you just heard was a lie. 10 CIA staffers were found to have breached Senate Intel Committee computers. Senator Mark Udall, no conservative, called on Brennan to resign. But Obama protected Brennan. And let's not forget that Brennan was caught lying last year on the Steele dossier.
Director Brennan, do you know who commissioned the Steele dossier?
I don't.
Did the CIA rely on it?
No.
Why not?
Because we didn't. It was not in any way used as a basis for the intelligence community assessment that was done.
Oh, my God, every time I hear that. In fact, 2 former intel chiefs, Jim Clapper and Mike Rogers, both disputed Brennan's claim that the dossier was not part of their assessment. Rogers in a letter to Congress and Clapper last October on CNN.
Some of the substantive content, not all of it, but some of the substantive content of the dossier, we were able to corroborate in our intelligence community assessment.
Well, given Brennan's history of lying and obfuscation and his completely unhinged statements about President Trump, any sane person would question his objectivity and credibility. Trump is right 100% to be skeptical of Brennan and to call him out on his misinformation campaign. As the Wall Street Journal's Kimberly Strassel noted last week, Brennan has been bragging that it was he who started the ball rolling on this entire Russian collusion narrative.
I encountered and am aware of information and intelligence that revealed contacts and interactions between Russian officials and U.S. persons involved in the Trump campaign that I was concerned about. I know that there was a sufficient basis of information and intelligence that required further investigation by the Bureau to determine whether or not U.S. persons were actively conspiring, colluding with Russian officials.
Well, even if you're not wild about everything Trump has done, as David Harsanyi wrote in The Federalist back in March, John Brennan shouldn't be lecturing Americans. He should be the focus of a congressional inquiry. He should be put under oath. And it looks like that may finally be coming.
Well, we have lots of questions for John Brennan, and he will definitely be sought by the committees for an interview. This is an extremely disturbing thing to see both he and James Comey, supposedly impartial government officials carrying out their jobs in very important areas in intelligence gathering and law enforcement, express the kind of extreme bias that they've shown now, which I think reflects quite accurately on what they were doing back in 2016.
Well, the idea that we should continue to allow John Brennan and other deep state partisans to use their security clearance.
Democrats have so far refused to meet with Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, though a couple meetings are in the planning phase. He was tapped by President Trump to replace retiring Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy. Lawmakers on the left are demanding the release of a trove of documents relating to Kavanaugh's past White House service under President Bush. One senator who did meet today with the nominee, John Kennedy of Louisiana, member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, joins us now. Senator, great to have you with us.
It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
What was your impression of the meeting today?
I like Judge Kavanaugh. I mean, I knew going in that he's a superior intellect. I've read, not through, but I've read enough of his opinions and his law review articles to know he's whip smart. But I wanted to use the time we had together to try to understand not just what's in his head, but what's in his heart. We talked a little about the law, but mostly we asked him how his beautiful daughters were handling all this. We talked a little bit about his teaching. I used to teach a little bit in law school, and you know how you juggle that with your day job. We talked about his coaching. He coaches girls basketball. We talked about Pete Maravich's. I saw Pete Maravich's first game as a college freshman, and of course Judge Kavanaugh's a big fan. We talked on the legal side. I didn't want to cross-examine him. That wasn't the purpose of the meeting. Again, I just want to know what's in his heart. But I asked him the role of precedent in our legal system, and he's thought about it deeply, and I was impressed with his answer. Look, I really like what I see. I mean, the guy's whip smart, but I think he can also understand and identify with just ordinary people like me.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've seen you cross-examine nominees. It doesn't always end well for them. So we'll see how this one goes.
Well, that's my job. I mean, my job. Look, this appointment. We're appointing an unelected, the most powerful unelected position in a country that's the most powerful in all of human history. So this is a big deal. And it's for life. We've got to make sure that we get it right, and that's part of my job on judiciary. And I'm going to do my job. I mean, I'm going to ask tough questions, but I have a pretty strong suspicion he can handle it.
Well, okay. Senator Menendez, one of your colleagues from across the aisle, not a big fan, hasn't seen his full record, but here's what he says about him so far.
I think if the American people understand Judge Kavanaugh's record, they will rise up, and that will stop his nomination.
What do you think he's referring to?
Well, I've looked at his record. I'm still reading his opinions. He's written about 300. I've started with his law review articles. But as best I can tell, here's what Judge Kavanaugh believes. He believes that the role of a judge is to call the balls and the strikes, to interpret the law. Not to decide every other Thursday that you want to rewrite the Constitution to prosecute your own personal political agenda. I think he understands that sometimes judges make policy. It's inevitable when you decide a case. You're making policy for that case, and it's a precedent. But he understands that judges should not try to be ideologues and do what Congress is supposed to do. If you want to be an ideologue and prosecute a personal political agenda, run for Congress or run for president. Now, I think that's the proper role of a judge. I think that's what Judge Kavanaugh understands. My friend Senator Menendez would probably prefer, not to put words in his mouth, but I know him pretty well, he'd probably prefer to have a liberal activist put on the court who says, well, you know, the Constitution is important, but it's just a guiding principle, and here's where I think we ought to go on this issue. And that's not what our founders intended. That's just not what I'm rather fond of the Constitution. I think our founders did a hell of a job with the document, and we ought to follow it.
Okay. Well, a lot of folks feel that that's exactly what they should be doing.
And if you don't want to follow it, that's why we have an amendment process. But you have to do it through the democratic process. You just can't have somebody appointed go say, I know what's best for all Americans, and this is what I'm going to decree.
Is it true that you have served as a high school substitute teacher?
I serve as a substitute teacher. I've done it for, I don't know, since 2002. I did it once in high school. I do mostly junior high and elementary.
Wow.
Let me tell you why I do it. If you want to understand what elementary and secondary education is all about, go be a volunteer substitute. They'll even take politicians.
All right. Who is tougher to, because I feel like you don't have a very high tolerance level for BS. Who is tougher to corral, junior high students or U.S. senators?
U.S. senators. And let me tell you.
You didn't even hesitate on that.
Let me tell you, when you're a substitute, everybody ought to do it. It makes you appreciate what it means to be a teacher. It's you and 25 kids, so it's a challenge. But senators, look, I like all of my colleagues. On the Republican side, we're more entrepreneurial, politically entrepreneurial. The Democrats tend to move in lockstep. We're together almost all the time, but every now and then we have a couple of senators that kind of wander off like a free-range chicken. And that's their prerogative, but when you've only got 50 of you, it makes it tough sometimes on votes, but that's what makes it interesting.
Senator, we are glad to have you appear with us tonight on Fox News at Night. Come back anytime.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
And fresh on the heels of the revelations from the FISA court and the warrants involving former Trump advisor Carter Page, House conservatives reportedly considering forcing, even without Speaker Paul Ryan's blessing, a contempt of Congress vote. The target, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Arizona Republican Congressman Andy Biggs is a member of the House Freedom Caucus, joins us live. Good to have you with us, sir.
Good to be with you, Shannon.
Okay, so let's talk about this. The Deputy Attorney General has already addressed whether or not he thinks that he's in any danger of contempt. Here's what he said at a hearing last month.
I'm working with a really superb team, some of the best lawyers in the country, Republicans, Democrats, career, political appointees. We are not in contempt of this Congress, and we are not going to be in contempt of this Congress.
He is not worried. This is something that leadership, it doesn't sound like they're signing on to. So what's the goal here?
Well, I mean, the reality is he's not worried because we've done nothing. I mean, he's extended every deadline. He's slow-walked things. We've got documents we requested a year ago. We've received documents that are so heavily redacted that to make them unintelligible. And so why would he think he's in contempt? Because we're the ones that have been held in contempt by him. And so I think at some point you have to protect the institution. You have to say Congress has got an oversight responsibility, and maybe We ought to exercise that. So one of the things we could do is we could actually hold him in contempt, or we could actually move on and say, maybe you should be impeached, maybe you shouldn't be in office any further.
Well, there's going to be a meeting tomorrow. My understanding, 6 GOP lawmakers will go over and meet with folks from the DOJ. There's going to be a discussion about turning over more documents and things. Do you think there'll be progress there? Because the Speaker has indicated he seems to think that there are things that are coming along.
Well, I mean, there may be progress, but what's progress when you should have had these documents to us 7 months ago, and you're going to slow walk them over to us some more? What does it mean? We still haven't seen the scope letter when it's in an unredacted form. So there's so much information that's been withheld, and almost every time we have a hearing, I happen to be at the hearing that Rosenstein said, you know, oh, I'm in good shape here. Every time we have a hearing, it's like we find out something more, and it's like, where did that come from? How come we're just finding out now?
Do you feel like there are times that you don't know what you don't know, and that prohibits your ability to ask for things and to find things if you don't know you're looking for them?
You're absolutely right. I mean, so that's why I think it's been dripped out so long, is because, oh, we get something here, we say, well, that leads to a few more questions. They drip something out for us, and it's time to say enough's enough.
Okay, in the Politico article talking about this plan to potentially try to do this end-run resolution, they say this: the Justice Department has emphasized that it has made unprecedented disclosures of sensitive materials to lawmakers, even at times bypassing the historical guardrails for sharing information connected to an ongoing investigation. True or false?
Well, I'm not sure if it's true or false, but I know it's something that they're spinning to say, well, see, we've been just perfectly compliant. Well, then where are the rest of the documents? If you're going to go over the guardrails that you say you are, why not give us all the documents then? Why not let us see them? And you know, if we need to go to a top secret room, let us go there, and we'll look at them there. And it's just not happening.
Do you think they're validly worried about leaks from either side? Because there have been accusations that both Democrats and Republicans have leaked things that are beneficial to their side of the argument.
I think in Washington, D.C., everyone should always be concerned about leaks. I mean, that's something you have to live with.
All day, every day.
Yeah, but I mean, look, we find that there's additional witnesses from time to time that we need to talk to, and it's all because it's been dripped out, and they haven't provided us with the information necessary for us to conduct our oversight investigation. That's a real problem.
Well, I know Republicans, a number of them are worried that Democrats will retake the House in the fall, and all of this comes to a screeching halt, and you won't be able to get much more information, if any, beyond that point. We will see how this meeting goes tomorrow.
All right.
Congressman, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Shannon.